Hi everyone, I'm Girl Writes What, and I just wanted to start off today by thanking everyone who's written to me in private messages to encourage me to keep doing what I'm doing, and telling me a bit about their lives and experiences. I don't always have the opportunity to answer every single message. Sometimes I get so many that some of them just get lost way down in the shuffle. But I do read them all, every single one of them, and they all really matter to me. And I want to encourage you all to keep sending them and keep helping me stay motivated. It amazes me how heartfelt and genuine so many of those messages have been. How much it seems to mean to a lot of you that someone like me is talking about all this stuff. And I really appreciated the flurry of don't lose hopes after my last bummed out video. It really helped to lift my spirits a lot. I also wanted to thank the few people who've sent me donations, give them an extra shout out. Some of those donations have just been stunning in their generosity and completely unexpected. And really, they're so appreciated. And I wanted to give an even bigger shout out to those of you who shared a bit of their lives with me, along with their financial support. It really matters to me. The donations help me free up the time I need to make these videos and to write about all of these issues. And it's really all the personal stories and messages that I get that motivate me to keep thinking about these things, and to want to keep doing what I'm doing. So just thanks for all of that. Now to business. I wanted to talk today a bit more about why I think society in general seems just so reluctant to tolerate men's rights, men standing up for themselves, their rights and their interests, and how our collective views of gender inform our responses to these things. I'm going to start off, relating a little story. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by Harry Crouch, president of the NCFM, to travel to Montana and speak at a symposium for and recruitment meeting for Montana State University's new NCFM chapter. I took a week off work. I drove down. I prepared a presentation touching on the new rules for adjudicating sexual misconduct cases on campuses across the U.S., rules that really take a sledgehammer to concepts like due process and burden of proof, and that are extremely impactful on men's lives regardless of whether they result in criminal sanctions or simply being expelled from school. The chapter head, Chris Thompson, had been putting up posters, giving presentations at some of the frat houses, explaining to men why they should join the chapter, what kind of services and resources were available at and through NCFM, and why they really needed to start looking out for their rights. He'd had a lot of positive feedback from those frat members, though when in public they tended to really talk in hushed voices about it. We set up our conference room at the local library, got the PowerPoint ready to go, and nobody showed up other than the reporter for the local NBC affiliate. She was a trooper. She decided to do a story posing the question of why no one would show up. And to her credit, it was really an unbiased story, and she seemed very sympathetic to a lot of the issues that we talked about. Things like job deaths, rates of suicide and homelessness, underrepresentation in post-secondary, and really sympathetic to the obstacles that are involved in getting any sort of advocacy done for these issues. One thing, out of about 100 posters that went up around campus to advertise the event, all but 2 were ripped down within a day. These weren't posted in places that were inappropriate. They were posted on public bulletin boards, places where everybody advertises their events, garage sales, selling cars or furniture. They were not in inappropriate places, and yet they were torn down. Um, Businesses were requested to post the posters in their windows, and they refused unanimously. All of them refused, citing a need to remain neutral. Even though campus feminist organizations use those same windows to advertise their events, the few men who talked to Chris in public kept their voices down, and they obviously did not want to be seen as interested in a men's organization or in their own rights. I was quoted in the news story that there is a strong, strong social condemnation of men standing up for themselves, that they're supposed to stand up for other people, but not for themselves. And I think the public resistance inherent in businesses refusing outright to post ads for a men's symposium, posters being torn down, and the feverish glee that you see in places like Shit Reddit Says or Man Boobs over the MSU event only proves that that social condemnation exists in spades. Especially since both the Shit Reddit Says crowd and Man Boobs, David Futrell, have repeatedly stated that the men's rights movement is an impotent movement with no relevant issues, uh, comprised of losers who live in basements and can't get girlfriends. I mean, one would think that if the MRM had no relevant issues and consisted of ineffectual people, no one would be bothered wasting any breath criticizing them or socially sabotaging their events. For whatever reason, I've become something of a target of criticism and hostility from these people. SRS has multiple dossier-style posts filled with quotes they've mined from my online conversations going back months, and they've even gone so far as to mine quotes from other websites to post on a subreddit devoted to unacceptable things said on Reddit. That's really a lot of time and energy to devote toward discrediting people you believe have no issues to speak of anyway, and who could never generate any kind of public support. And because of that, I'm constantly coming across people who attribute things to me that I've never said. And when I ask them to direct me to where exactly I said that, it's inevitably revealed that they heard it from someone else. And this just stinks of a campaign, an active campaign to discredit me, to discredit the movement, a movement that they believe is, does a good enough job of discrediting themselves. So I don't understand the mentality there. Or at least I didn't until I started thinking a little further. Given all of this stuff that I've mentioned, the resistance of regular people to support men's rights causes, even in uncontroversial ways, and the intensity of this feminist spearheaded campaign to discredit and misrepresent and silence a group they profess is impotent and irrelevant in the first place. All of this got me thinking about how it is that feminism managed to gain the steam it did, despite being ostensibly against all established social norms, and become the benefactors of so much public tolerance, despite the kind of hate speech that was common to academic and literary icons of the second wave, like Mary Daly and Andrea Dworkin, and writings like the Scum Manifesto. Especially since men advocating to end something like circumcision can come up against some extreme hostility and even accusations of being insensitive or anti-woman if they don't preface every commentary with 1,000 words describing how female genital mutilation is a much more harmful practice, even though it sometimes isn't. One can't advocate for accuracy in informing the public as to the true nature of intimate partner violence, how half its victims are men, and how the system leaves both them and their children twisting in the wind without being called a misogynist. David Futrell, Man Boobs himself, has characterized the MRM's efforts in this area as an agenda to dismantle existing protections for women. In his mind, we don't want to direct state funds toward battered men's shelters or toward providing equal access to existing shelters. We want to tear down battered women's shelters. And when you ask for proof of this, he's got nothing. nothing but his belief. So how is it that advocating to end circumcision or to provide domestic violence services to male victims, how can that be seen as anti-woman? I'm coming to the conclusion that anyone who fights for is also perceived, whether it's accurate or not, to be fighting against. And when there's a gender binary with men on one side and women on the other, fighting for women as a group is going to be perceived as fighting against men, and vice versa. This didn't pose much of an obstacle for feminists. They had a lot of gendered perceptions working in their favor, all of which made their attacks on men and masculinity, which have frequently been much more vicious and overt than anything from even the icons of the men's rights movement, palatable to society's collective consciousness. Keep in mind, these perceptions that I'm talking about have existed long before feminism, pretty much forever. Our collective perceptions of gender tell us that female violence and hostility are either non-existent, essentially harmless, or excusable. They tell us that men are powerful, threatening, and potentially dangerous. They tell us women are the appropriate benefactors of society's protection, help, and support, and that men are the appropriate objects for absorption of violence and harm. Our perceptions tell us that women are objects that are acted upon, and that men are agents who act upon others and the environment. Those collective perceptions of men and women only facilitated every one of feminism's efforts. Their demands for suffrage, equal rights, and protection under the law, even the extraordinary measures they've demanded to protect women from harm, all of those demands dovetailed beautifully with our perception that giving women what they need is beneficial and appropriate. Those perceptions also facilitated feminism's ability to demonize masculinity and are responsible for society's ability to tolerate the levels of hate and violent fantasy found in, say, the Scum Manifesto, since we perceive the hostility of women and their proxies to be harmless and excusable. And the groups such writings target are, in our perceptions, not only powerful and potentially dangerous, but the appropriate objects for the absorption of violence and hostility. These perceptions also allowed feminism to essentially rewrite history, to craft a palatable and believable lie as to the nature of society in the past. For example, their claim that domestic violence against women was traditionally socially acceptable. This claim ignores easily accessible facts, such as laws on the law books against wife battering, which provided for punishments ranging from chain gangs to public flogging, that have been on the books since at least the early 1800s. Reported incidences of vigilante justice against battering husbands that included lynching, and newspaper reports of convictions and sentences going back at least to the early 1800s. At the same time, utter falsehoods appear not only on blogs and in media opinion pieces, but in feminist textbooks written by scholars such as Domestic Violence Law, 2nd edition, which according to Berkeley Law School is or was the premier textbook on the subject. That book brazenly states that the rule of thumb, described as a law limiting a man's right to beat his wife to sticks no wider than his thumb, was attributed to an emperor of Rome who never existed, Romulus, son of the god Mars, and from mythology, and claims that this law was perpetuated in English common law and throughout Europe, even though no such laws have ever been found to exist. Even when the lie was pointed out to them, they did not change it in the printing of their next edition. These are easy lies to believe. Men are powerful and potentially dangerous agents who act upon others, while women are seen as objects at the mercy of outside forces and who require protection. They're easy lies to tell, even by those who know they're false, because there is no socially or instinctively ingrained taboo against attacking men. There never has been. In fact, the absorption of violence and hostility is a man's natural place in the scheme of things. These perceptions are what lead people to try to justify a woman beating a man in public by assuming he must have done something to deserve it. Men are dangerous, women are harmless. Men are the appropriate targets of violence, and men act while women are acted upon. In order to maintain these perceptions, especially the agent-object dichotomy, we will actually manufacture justifications for such a woman to turn her action into a reaction to some hypothetical action on his part. I bet he was cheating on her. To force the situation to comply with our instinctive internal gendered narrative. So when feminism fights for women, even when its representatives are actively and hostilely attacking and doing harm to men in order to do that, most people see those attacks as harmless and reactive rather than active. Attacks aimed at a group whose natural role is to absorb them. And the moment feminists constructed out of whole cloth their elaborate justification, namely patriarchy theory, everything they told us complied with what our instincts were already telling us. And all just seemed right with the world. It's that desperate desire that exists in most of us to recharacterize all female action, especially hostility and violence, as reactive, that left society wide open to the snake oil of patriarchy theory and feminist ideas of male privilege and gender oppression of women. Here were feminists, angry and hostile and hating on men, and the rest of us did what people do when they see a woman beating on a man. We seize on an excuse. Well, he must have done something to deserve it, and it must have been horrible too. And there was patriarchy theory to explain it all. So many people have swallowed patriarchy theory because if men hadn't always been oppressive assholes, then feminists wouldn't have a reason to be so angry at men in the first place. And the first thing we will always look for when women act in that way is what exactly they're reacting to. Patriarchy theory was the tasty, tasty rationalization most of society gobbled up to explain the overt hostility of second-wave feminists toward males, and feminism's ever-increasing advancement of women's interests at the expense of everybody else. If those ladies are hating on men and pushing to spend ever more public dollars to protect and support women, productive or dysfunctional, well, they obviously have a damn good reason, right? They're obviously reacting to some injustice. And the most obvious place to look for that injustice is in the public sphere actors who occupy the other side of the gender binary. Just like that man who's getting a beat down from his girlfriend down the sidewalk, men as a group must have done something horrible to deserve all this. And now let's flip things on their head and take a look at how our perceptions of men and women inform society's reaction to the men's rights movement. If men are fighting for men as a group, then who are they fighting against? The most obvious answer is women, the people on the other side of the gender binary, and this is the first place our knee-jerks will lead us. Even if MRAs confine their condemnation to feminism, feminism is women by proxy, and the perceived stench of misogyny remains. And women are not the appropriate objects for the absorption of violence and hostility in our collective perceptions. They are, in fact, the appropriately protected class. To the majority of society, men fighting for men as a group feels on a visceral level dangerously close to a man kicking the shit out of a woman. And because she is an object rather than an agent, she can't possibly have done anything to deserve it. Because men are seen as agents who act upon the world, society is more interested in focusing on suppressing the acting out, rather than exploring any of the causes for it. Because we perceive men as appropriately placing the well-being of others before their own, they appear churlish and immature when they prioritize their own interests. Because they're perceived as powerful, they're assumed to not be subject to any hardship they shouldn't just be able to overcome or weather as men, or wave their hands and make it go away. And patriarchy theory, which posits that men created society in such a way as to oppress women for the benefit of men, means you can always blame all of men's problems, no matter where they come from, and no matter how horrible they are. Well, you can blame them on men. When women are oppressed, it's men's fault. When men are oppressed, it's their own fault. I mean, Men are in all the positions of real power, so if there were any real problems for men, those guys would be on it. After all, they constructed patriarchy just to benefit men at the expense of women, right? Except there is no evidence to back that up, to back up the claim that men in power will act in the interests of men or at the expense of women, or that they even act in men's interests at all. In fact, there's evidence that demonstrates that the opposite is true. A 2004 study of gender differences in automatic in-group bias found that men lack a mechanism that bolsters automatic own-group preference. Only women showed this bias in all 4 experiments, and in 3 of them, all subjects, male and female, showed a strong bias toward women, which is a horrifying thing to me, because it shows that women in power will usually act strongly in the interests of women, while men in power exhibit no own group preference at all, but will act more often than not in the interests of women as well. Society has been well and truly conned by feminism's pathological lying. We've been duped by our own instinctive perceptions of men and women, and our own internal biases that serve women's interests over those of men. And we've managed to vilify, shortchange, disadvantage, and marginalize half our population in doing so. In the UK alone, shifts in social and education policy have rendered 20% of men under 25 officially unemployable. Not unemployed, unemployable. And no one seems to want to do anything but wonder what the hell is wrong with boys that they're dropping out of school. If and when we ever snap out of this cognitive coma and see the damage we've done in our slavery to appease the ravenous female at the expense of men, families, social cohesion, and even children, we'd really better hope that men aren't so marginalized, damaged, uneducated, impoverished, unemployable, and apathetic to pick up the shovels and help us start digging ourselves out. But frankly, the longer it goes, the less likely they're going to be able to help us when it all falls apart. Anyhow, that's not all I have to say about that issue, but this is a long video, and long enough already, and I got things to do with a kid coming home for lunch, so I'm going to say see you later. Thanks again to everybody who's kept me motivated and helped me do this, and I guess that's it for now. Bye.